Coming up on Dialogue Weekend, China holds its first major international economic and trade event since the pandemic. What makes the fair so special? German writer publishes a report accusing China of suppressing Uyghur birth rates in Xinjiang. What's going on in China's west? And this week's newsmaker. Now on Dialogue Weekend.
Welcome to Dialogue Weekend. I'm Xu Jinping. More than 18,000 international and domestic companies from 148 countries and regions are joining the China International Fair for Trade in Services. Over 100,000 people have registered to attend the 6-day event taking place both online and offline. It's the first major economic and trade event being held in China since the coronavirus outbreak in January. Chinese President Xi Jinping said China will continue to ease market access in the services sector and actively expand the import of high quality. To have a better understanding of the event, we have Professor John Gung from the University of International Business and Economics and Zun Ahmed Khan, a visiting fellow at the Belt and Road Strategy Institute, Tsinghua University. So welcome to the show, both Zun and John. So here, obviously, there's an important speech given by President Xi Jinping about trade in services, both globally and also the Chinese situation. So what's your takeaway, John?
Well, I think my first impression is that his message has been very consistent throughout the years, being a leader in a globalist kind of idea. China will continue to go down that path. He calls for an open and inclusive environment globally. And he's also committed to keep opening up China's domestic market. And I think these messages are all very consistent with what I've been China doing so far at this point. And also I want to make a point that I think this message is, his message is also, I would say, quite a humble message. There's not a shred of sort of triumphalism here in terms of combating the coronavirus, even though China has been doing incredibly well compared to other countries, right? He didn't even mention that at all. He didn't even mention the United States, for example. So, yeah, so I think, this is a message that's very accommodating, that's very open, that is very humble, in my opinion. And I think it bodes well for the next few years of China's diplomacy.
Well, Zun, so a similar question to you here. Obviously, President Xi promised China will continue to open up its service sector, and also he supports, he spoke highly of the globalization and free trade in services here. So what's impressed you the most?
I think, first of all, as someone, I've been based in China for about 5 years. I've been studying the Belt and Road Initiative, and I feel that this event goes really well. It's really in sync with the fact that we have moved from a first phase towards the second phase in the Belt and Road Initiative. So whereas the first phase was about heavy infrastructure, basic requirements of many countries in the world, in the region especially, in the second phase we need cooperation in terms of businesses. We need to understand each other on a different dimension altogether. And I think the fact that trade in services, I mean the service sector, is going to be very important. It's going to be significant in determining the quality of this cooperation moving forward. So of course, you just mentioned that about 140 different countries and regions are participating. About 100,000 people are involved in this. Many embassies based in China, many countries' embassies based in China are also interested, because these countries and these regions are interested in deepening cooperation businesses. And of course, the fact that right now globally we are facing a situation which has taken us a step back and reflect on what really is important, what we need to prioritize if we want to improve the quality of lives of people. So this event at this point, firstly, is promising because it shows how far China has come in the fight against COVID-19. Secondly, because we definitely need cooperation. Unless countries cooperate and deepen this dimension, we cannot prosper together. And I feel like the COVID-19 experience globally has definitely strengthened that. So, and of course, moving from phase 1 to phase 2, this is the priority sector, to understand each other's markets, to understand each other's demands in a better way.
Well, John, we are talking about the trade fair in services. You know, for a lot of people, regular folks would say trade means like I purchase something specific, you know, touchable, you know, tangible, like a suit, a pair of shoes. But here we're talking about services. So what are those products, let's say, quote unquote, here?
Well, first of all, a service is a very large sector in China's economy. It accounts for, you know, close to 50% of China's GDP. But about trading service, you know, these typically are things can be categorized into two classes. One is, you know, services provided here in China. The tourism industry, for example, we provide hotel, we provide, you know, airline services, and also, you know, a slew of other things. There are also services that are provided outside of the country. For example, you know, Chinese companies opening bank branches, for example, in the United States. Bank of China have several branches in the United States. That's a service export in a sense. But also on the import side, we're also having both sides. For example, when Chinese tourists go to the United States, when Chinese students go to the United States, that's a service import, right? That's a service import, okay?
Right. That's China purchasing education and tourism from other countries, basically.
Right. So there are two, you know, it goes both ways. And I think overall, you know, my understanding is that China's overall trade picture in service is that we have a small trade deficit. We probably import more services than we export services. But I think this sector is growing very fast, especially against the backdrop of China's economy being more and more service-oriented. I mean, you can see that the service sector, as a proportion of GDP, has been keep climbing. So I think, you know, you naturally see more and more services provided by Chinese companies.
Well, you know, give us a big picture of this global trade in services. My understanding is like, you know, for Western, more developed countries, they are strong in services. And also, like for China, for example, China is a manufacturer, you know, called a world factory. Is more strong in manufacturing goods.
Yeah, well, I'm more familiar with the situation in the United States. You know, more than 85% of the U.S. GDP is associated with service.
With services.
And American companies in the service that are very strong. Okay, I'll just give you some examples. The accounting, auditing service. You know, we have the big four companies.
The big four companies.
Yeah, and they are dominating Chinese market. They're all American companies. The Roy & Hughes, you know, PwC, right?
Yes.
You know, there's a couple of two other companies. But anyway, these are what I describe as more higher value added services, financial sector, insurance, for example, banking, engineering, consulting for services. All these things are, you know, the more high-end services.
Yeah,
right.
Well, Zong, you mentioned about you know, like the numbers, as I mentioned earlier, like you know, 100,000 people registered to join the fair one way or another. Obviously, there are a lot of Chinese, including the media, with my colleagues. They are there. They will be there for a few days, and some of the folks here in Beijing and other parts of the world, China, will join the show. So, you know, what does it say about China's handling of the coronavirus? Because this is probably the, I don't know, first, at least in China, a big event, even around the world.
I think, you know, I've been in Beijing since January, and all of us who were staying here, we saw firsthand how the situation was handled. And I was also covering the situation, how China, and especially, you know, in some parts of China that had more cases, how the people were also very disciplining in dealing with the coronavirus in the situation. So of course, we know that the policy was timely. We know that people played a very significant role by understanding that they are not just recipients of the policy, but they're participants in that process of making the policy successful. And the discipline with which people move forward show now this event is evidence for how far we've come. And I think for many people in other parts of the world, it is surprising to see how, even though now, you know, we have almost no cases for months, but people are still wearing masks, people are still following the SOPs they need to. And because there's this discipline and seriousness, we are able to have an event as big as this one. We are able to live the new normal is going closer and closer towards to the old normal, because the requirements are being met. When people are traveling from abroad, they are spending 2 weeks in strict quarantine, etc., etc. So this says a lot about how serious everyone took it, obviously Chinese people, but also other residents of China. And I think it is also an example still for countries, many of whom are facing a second emergence, which is very serious. Perhaps if they try to observe how China is dealing with it, even though we have negligible cases, people are still serious about following the SOPs and protocols. And if that continues, the probability of a second serious emergence is also very low. So it says a lot. I mean, this is an immense success for everyone who made this situation as we stand here today possible, for sure.
Yeah, getting back as much as possible to the normal state. Well, let's move on to something more controversial here. Well, Xinjiang in China's northwestern region has been in focus for quite some time. The latest accusation surrounds population growth, or the opposite, in particular that of the Uyghur people. So what's really going on in Xinjiang? How credible are those charges? And how does the finger-pointing fit into the ongoing geopolitical competition between the U.S. and China? For their perspective, joining me now again are John Gong and Zun Ahmad Khan. So welcome back here. Obviously, we are talking about a report here by a guy by the name of Adrian Zanz.
Right.
In his report, he accused, he pointed out the issue, he's concerned about, like, the population suppression. Population has been declining in Xinjiang. And then there's a suppression of the birth rate, in particular about the Uyghur people. John, I know you have been doing some research on that.
Yeah, I went through this report funded by Jamestown Foundation, which is an American think tank based in Washington, D.C. The problem I have with this report is that I don't think he has a very accurate picture of the population growth situation in Xinjiang, because he doesn't have the data. I mean, there are multiple places in his report where he draw conclusions based on basically speculation, based on hypothesis, based on conjecture, and all these things. There's actually one place that he referred to another report provided by a prefecture in Xinjiang government. And I go and I went there and try to find the source, and I couldn't find it. So he's trying to piece together a picture, in my opinion, by mining bits and pieces of information buried in various reports, and I think it's problematic. I mean, I give him credit for the effort to trying to piece together a picture, but this is it's very sketchy, and also I don't think there's much science behind it. The biggest problem, in my opinion, is that it's a very complicated picture. I mean, for example, he specifically mentioned the Kashgar prefecture, where the population of the Uyghur people are declining, right? But he doesn't know that the population of the ethnic Han people are also declining. The overall population trend in China is actually peaking, right? And it's starting to drop. And this is it's not just happening in China; it's a worldwide phenomenon. As income increases, and you go to the Nordic countries in Northern Europe, you go to Japan, for example, right? All the industrialized countries are seeing their population coming down, and China is no exception to that. So you really have to have a lot of data, in my opinion, have accurate information, detailed information, to have a very detailed study to come to some kind of a conclusion. And I think he doesn't have any of these things. So even though there's a lot of sensationalism behind it, there's a lot of press coverage about this report, but if you really dig deeper into the next level of details, just too many holes to hold water.
Well, Zun, so what's your impression and what's your response to these accusations? You have been in China for 5 years. You have been meeting people from different parts of this country. You have been to different parts of the country. Tell us your experience. Yeah.
Mr. Xu, I think with this kind of propaganda, whatever his intention may be, I guess the key question is, who is his audience? Who is the audience, and who is responding and promoting this kind of work? As Professor just mentioned, there are many holes, there are many gaps in his arguments. This is something that Mr. Adrian has been doing consistently for many years, and he changed his title from someone who was studying religion and theology to a Xinjiang expert, even though he has only been to Xinjiang once in his life. And the thing is that this perception, like creating this perception that there's some kind of genocide. Genocide itself is such a strong word, and people obviously in many parts of the world we have witnessed real genocides. So using this kind of terminology for a province that has many organic reasons why the population is increasing or decreasing, and obviously we also know that in reality, if you look at the numbers that were released recently, and these numbers anyone in the world can have access to, the population of the Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang increased by 25%. And the Hans increased by about 2%. So this, I mean, if we actually look at the numbers, his arguments don't add up. So I feel like this is part of a grander, a bigger effort to delegitimize China in some way, to make China, to make the Chinese government seem ruthless towards a certain people, and it goes in sync with an overall policy that we see from the West, especially the United States, to discredit China. And maybe the audience of this kind of propaganda is countries that are cooperating with China in the region. Mm-hmm. So it is unfortunate, and I feel like more needs to be done to make people realize what really is happening in parts of China, to make people realize that actually there are many Muslims in this country, and they practice their religion freely. And this is maybe more stories when they come out, when people find it easier to access, to even travel to China whenever they can and see for themselves that such people or such documentaries or such reports are only their intention is just to discredit a country to a great extent. So I feel like it's unfortunate, and I think we know who is doing it and why and for whom.
Yeah, very unfortunate. But anyway, John, here, one of the issue here is about family planning policy. China has such a policy, right. And in Xinjiang area, the policy was implemented starting from 1975. Right. Because here are some sensitive topics. Ethnic minorities, Muslims. Here is family planning policy here. Tell us how is the policy being being implemented in Xinjiang?
Well, I mean, since that time, China has this birth control policy, but this is actually not applied universally here in China. It's actually applied universally towards ethnic Han people like you and me. We're being
majority of
that's right. But when it comes to minorities, we have those exceptional rules, and the Uyghur people are part of this exceptional. The group of people who are being applied this exceptional rules. They are allowed to have more children, actually, right? So, I think, first of all, this criticism is just not fair. But over time, we have gradually come to a stage where we want to get rid of those sort of, differential treatments. But at this point, the whole idea of birth control is withering away here in China. We actually get rid of that. So, this criticism of we are applying a special set of rules towards a certain group of people. It's actually in the opposite direction. They're climbing the wrong tree by criticizing China's policy in that regard.
Well, just a bit simply to more evidence. For example, some people have pointed out about Zhang's research here. He quoted basically 3 Uyghur women as his source of information in the report. They say these women allegedly had suffered unlawful detention and were forced to undergo compulsory sterilization by the government. I mean, how convincing are that?
Well, I actually went through the 2 reports. I think one is from Wall Street Journal. They wrote a story about this. My opinion is that allegedly these women take some pills and they suspected that it's a pill for sterilization purposes because they feel ill, they feel dizzy, they feel tired. Oh, come on. I mean, there got to be some medical evidence to support. What kind of pill is that, right?
Exactly.
Does it fit the syndromes? And does it really have an effect? Or
even side effects,
Right. We don't have any of this in that report. And I also want to point out that these women, they are living outside of China right now, and obviously, they have grudges against the Chinese government. Obviously, what they say have to be taken with a grain of salt. And it's quite unfortunate that they can say whatever they want to say, but the journalists from these two newspapers, they got to have some ethics here in terms of corroborating from a third source to make sure that what they are saying is absolutely true, right? So I think they are falling short in that regard, and I call this yellow journalism, just to sort of make it sensationalized and try to push a point. But when it comes to the hard evidence of the things they're claiming,
it's lacking.
I don't see it.
The problem is also, if I may quickly add, it's also exactly the point of sensationalism that was just mentioned. We do have a social media environment, a global atmosphere where people have the incentive to also say something eccentric and not really vet the evidence, and it results in personal gain. So now we know who this person is because his report said something extremely provocative. And now whether or not what he said is true is going to be determined by whoever goes that extra mile to find out, and whoever has the interest to find out how much truth there is in whatever evidence he gathered. So this is also a problem, I think, of the world we live in right now. Instant gratification, sensationalism sells more than maybe bland reality, etc., etc. So I guess this is a broader issue, and people can gain a lot personally in a short period without actually conforming to media ethics. So it's an unfortunate reality.
Again, exactly. I want to pick up what Zoon has said earlier about this obviously the finger-pointing accusation that does seem to me fit into this general picture of Washington launching so-called Cold War against China. There's a need for them to build this like a Western coalition in depicting China in a very negative light. Xinjiang, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Tibet. These are all the products of those efforts.
Well, this is particularly true, I think, in the last few weeks and last few months, and I think has a lot to do with the U.S. presidential election. I mean, all these things are coming from the State Department. Secretary of State, Mr. Michael Pompeo, appears to have his own personal agenda here. He has initiated a lot of things against China, Xinjiang being one of them. And I think this is what I call this diversionary strategy, diversionary foreign policy. In other words, I think it fits very well with President Trump's agenda to make China a scapegoat in the presidential election. Everything is China's fault. He did a great job. Now this country across the Pacific, they're causing all these problems for us. But the problem is that American people don't buy this argument at all. Today, American people know that his handling of the economy, his handling of the coronavirus has been a total fiasco. But nevertheless, his State Departments keep pushing these things. So I would expect this behavior will continue up until November 3rd, and we'll see.
More probably.
I think it's going to get worse.
More finger pointing, more accusations against China
in the next few weeks. But fortunately, he doesn't have much time, though.
Hopefully, our listeners, our viewers, and I think people in the U.S. and also in most of the Western country, they could see a true picture of what's really going on inside China, including, of course, Xinjiang, and ask more questions, right? And to be more curious and more serious about that. Well, let's leave it there for now and take a look at this week's newsmaker. Okay, Miloš Vystrčil, the president of the Senate of the Czech Republic, John, who is this guy and why he is insisting, like visiting Taiwan, breaking this one China principle of his government's basically toward China?
Well, he's the Senate Speaker. He inherits that position from the previous guy who passed away some time ago. The other guy wanted to visit Taiwan, and basically he's carried the baton. It's unfortunate actually that he takes this position. He calls it a choice between counting pennies and upholding human rights. But this has nothing to do with human rights, in my opinion. I mean,
No.
I think this has a lot to do with his domestic politics. You know, he has his
Like
political. Well, he has political ambition. He represents the opposition party, and he's probably going to run for president next time. So, so he's taking a position right now against the president of Czech Republic. And also I think it's probably helped a lot and pushed a lot by some business people who have business ties with Taiwan. You know, then we have to admit that Taiwan does have fairly large significant investment in Czech Republic, and you know, that's probably the reason behind this. But the thing I want to point out is that the Czech government, you know, they have an official position that they uphold one China policy. And the Senate is one branch of the government, right? It's one branch of the government. So as part of the government, you need to adhere to the official position. Same thing with the United States, right? You know, at least the United States Senate still upholds the one China policy, even though, you know, they have a slightly different view with the executive branch. But nevertheless, I think what he has done causes I hope it's not irreparable damage, but certainly very significant damage to the Czech-China relations. You know, the business community in Czech Republic is probably going to see some price they have to pay.
Well, Zong, this is one China principle. Obviously, you know, Chinese government, the Chinese people, they hold it very dearly to their hearts because it's critical to the country's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Tell us your understanding of it, and in particular, how important it is in conducting, you know, their relationship with the Chinese.
I think definitely it's, every country has certain priorities, and sovereignty is a sensitive point. For China and for 1.4 billion people, the One China policy is something that is integral to their identity, and it is something that countries who want to cooperate with China, at least it is important to respect. There's some basic boundaries that don't need to be crossed. And I think by taking an 89 people delegation, one of the reasons, obviously, as was just mentioned, there's some domestic factors as well. There's some parties, some stakeholders within Czech Republic. They want to stoke these differences. Maybe they want to, there's some stakeholders that benefit from a certain deepening of ties with Taiwan and also offending China. But we also know that this act resulted in political mileage, and it was short-sighted in a certain way. So I think definitely, if with any country, like if with China, if you cross this line, you go out of the way to offend, then the consequences could obviously be, first of all, a lack of trust. I mean, basic trust is a prerequisite for any kind of cooperation. And obviously, we know that a Central European country delegation was led by him. So I think definitely this is something that China has taken seriously. Even within Czech Republic, the government has expressed that this was an unnecessary provocation that could have negative consequences. So I also don't think this is too different from an overall global atmosphere where there's polarization when it comes to China and other global stakeholders, right? So I do feel, yes, there could be consequences, but what they could be depends on how things move forward. And countries that really want to cooperate should know that these are certain lines that don't need to be crossed. And this is just a basic decorum in diplomacy that has been breached.
Yeah, for a lot of Chinese, of course, this is like a basic respect for the government's position, but also the Chinese people. Yes. Thank you, thank you. Well, with that, we are coming to the end of today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also watch us on the CGTN app or on YouTube. I'm Xu Jinduo. You can find me on Twitter, Xu Jinduo. Thank you for watching. See you next time.